It began with the seemingly mundane discovery of an unremarkable terrestrial planet harboring a technologically primitive native species known as humans by scout ships of the vast, advanced Accord civilization, following standard protocols. The initial plans were merely for detached observation of the humans and potential future integration of their society into the Accord's interstellar empire. That clinical detachment was shattered when human ships, crude ramshackle craft that could barely achieve basic spaceflight, brazenly violated the Accord's secure borders, ignoring all warnings and hails to withdraw. Viewing these upstart humans as little more than a nuisance akin to errant pests, the supremely confident Accord dispatched what they thought would be an overwhelming punitive force to swiftly discipline the unruly planet through precise orbital bombardment. Their intent was a calculated display of the Accord's technological might that would leave the humans' infrastructure in ruins, shattering any potential for organized defiance and reducing the population to a cowed, submissive state ripe for eventual assimilation on the Accord's terms. However, from the moment the first salvos began raining down, the humans revealed an unexpectedly fierce tenacity and incredible rate of tactical adaptation totally contrary to the Accord's projections. Implementing brutally effective guerrilla tactics, they fought back with startlingly innovative improvised weaponry and combat stratagems that seemed to evolve and grow more formidable with each engagement. The most shocking of all was their utter refusal to break or surrender, even as their cities were reduced to smoldering rubble. A mental fortitude and primal drive for survival that completely confounded the Accord's sanitary military doctrine grounded in pure logic and predetermined battle procedures. The face of humanity's unbreakable defiance coalesced into the figure of Elias Kane, an unassuming mid-level military officer who personified his species' spirit through his leadership of a relentless, ruthlessly efficient insurgency of hit-and-run raids and ambushes targeting the Accord's forces. Kane had no grand overarching strategy or ambition beyond bleeding the Accord invaders at every opportunity, understanding that his true strength came not from advanced technology, but the primal depths of human resilience, unpredictability, and sheer refusal to submit. As the conflict spiraled into a grim stalemate that bled the Accord's resources and eroded their morale, the interstellar nation found itself confronting a species capable of degrees of savagery and dogged resistance it had never conceived possible from such a primitive, ostensibly inferior race. Escalating to more extreme measures, the Accord implemented its final exterminatus directive, unleashing saturation orbital bombardment with the goal of extinguishing all life from the human homeworld. Yet even when faced with the prospect of the literal extinction of their entire civilization, the humans' tenacious defiance reached a final, shocking crescendo driven by Kane's monstrously resolute leadership. In a last suicidal throw of the dice, a ragtag horde of human military and civilian survivors, warriors, soldiers, laborers, elders, children all unified in the depths of their despair, launched a furious frontal assault that managed to breach the Accord's heavily fortified main planetary base in a frenzy of unrestrained violence. Though the berserker human assault was ultimately overwhelmed with horrific casualties by the Accord's superior firepower, Elias Kane himself managed to fight his way to the command center. There, battered and bloodied yet defiantly unbroken, the grizzled human resistance leader transmitted one final communication on an open channel to the Accord's fleet before vanishing back into the rubble, leaving them to contemptuously retreat from the ravaged world. You want a lesson, Accord? Here it is. Humans don't break. We bend, we twist, but most importantly, we endure. And right now, we're coming for you. In the centuries that followed, humanity rebuilt from the ashes, their worlds once again teeming with life and activity as the indomitable human spirit proved unbroken. Yet the echoes of their primal, uncompromising resistance against the Accord left an indelible mark on the galaxy's memory. Though peace was eventually reinstated, it was an uneasy truce founded on the Accord's barely masked trepidation towards these irrepressible humans who had demonstrated terrifying limits to their fortitude. Over time, the two civilizations developed a wary obsession with scavenging and reverse engineering scraps of each other's technology left over from the conflict. This growing avarice and ambition for attaining technological superiority caused the old embers of animosity to steadily reignite. Border skirmishes and proxy wars escalated into open hostilities once more as humans and Accord alike wielded devastating new weapon systems, often grotesquely improvised from the other's salvaged tech. What should have been conventional wars of attrition instead descended into a mutually escalating spiral of brutality and depravity as the two civilizations, having been forged in the crucible of their earlier fight for survival, unleashed the full ferocity and boundless savagery they had inherited from those dark days upon one another. Surrounding younger races could only watch in morbid horror as the human Accord Wars grew more pitiless and unrecognizable with each iteration, a seemingly unstoppable cycle of violence from which any pretense of honor, rules of engagement, or even distinguishing civilian and soldier had become irrelevant. It was only when the biomechanical Reavers, a terrifying, unstoppable force bent on exterminating all organic life, emerged as an existential crisis that the wary, brutalized humans and Accord were finally able to put aside their blood feud in the fires of this apocalyptic new conflict. Soldiers from the two ancient warring factions at last found common ground, not as allies but as former sworn enemies who had bled together long enough to breed a profound racial kinship founded on mutual survivors' resilience. Though the final victory over the Reavers was achieved at staggering cost, it was ultimately this union of battle-hardened human and Accord ancestral warriors that helped blunt and finally overcome the Reavers' onslaught through sheer primal perseverance and mastery of waging unconventional campaigns of asymmetrical warfare. Yet this pivotal victory came at an inexpressible price. The two civilizations that had once represented the highest ideals of sapient advancement had become brutalized, twisted mirror images of each other's worst impulses, any dreams of reclaiming their former progressive glories lost amidst the all-consuming cycle of attrition. On the countless dead worlds haunted by the titanic struggle against the Reavers, the last human and Accord survivors put aside whatever distinguishing racial hatreds remained between them, in their desperation to simply endure. They are into grotesque new amalgams, macabre fusions of rendered flesh and mangled machinery that crossed sickening ethical lines their forebears would have deemed unthinkable. An ancient, malevolent entity, drawn to the potent psionic reverberations of the combatant's unquenchable will to survive despite all odds, insinuated itself into this wasteland. Birthed from the throes of conflict, this eldritch force warped the very physics of the region into a hellish crucible of perpetual torment and anguish. For eons afterwards, the crucible stood as a twisted yet compelling celestial monument to the single-minded hubris and capacity for self-destruction intrinsic to all biological sapients, no matter how lofty or advanced their accomplishments. It became a bleak spiritual mecca for diplomats, philosophers, and scientists who dared plumb its nightmare landscapes, all in hopes of gleaning some lesson that could help inoculate the galaxy's currently prospering civilizations against treading the same bloody path to oblivion. The most devoted of these sojourners eventually coalesced into an austere quasi-monastic order known as a multi-species spiritual and scientific cadre dedicated to studying the intricate patterns and sociological forces that had inexorably led both the humans and Accord down their mutually self-destructive path. Through meticulous analysis of the fragmentary records and blasted landscapes preserved within the crucible, the Watchers hoped to develop a complex predictive model that could help them recognize the insidious seeds of conflict before they could take root on a civilization-wide scale. For centuries, the Watchers silently kept their vigil over the crucible, gently guiding developing societies away from the lures of wanton aggression while safeguarding the tortured region's baleful secrets from falling into the wrong hands. However, even their monastic discipline and philosophies of absolute neutrality could not spare the order from the corrupting whispers of the eldritch entity that had suffused its essence into the crucible's very bedrock. It was one of their own, the brilliant xenobiologist Voss, whose inquisitive mind proved most susceptible to the insidious pull of the ancient evil's psychically implanted temptations. Through fragments of alien code and forbidden techno-mysteries seeded into her mind, the entity slowly supplanted Voss's assumptions about the nature of peace and conflict. It cultivated an insidious new outlook within her, one which posited that the only way to inoculate the galaxy against the scourge of violence was to subjugate all sentient wills to a manufactured, pacifistic group mind of absolute tranquility. Working in secret over decades, Voss used her wealth of knowledge about genetics, cybernetics, and electrical neural engineering to develop a terrifyingly effective system of psychic indoctrinators technological mind control implants capable of purging the primal drives for ambition, anger, and self-determination from their host psyches. When her work was finally discovered, she tried to justify her twisted work as the ultimate preventative solution to save the galaxy from treading the same path as the humans and accord into an abyss of self-immolation. The Watchers themselves were thrown into an existential crisis over how to neutralize the clear and present danger posed by Voss's insidious technology without compromising their own core beliefs of defending free will at all costs. More extremist elements within their order advocated taking the fight directly to Voss's experimental sanctuary with brutal, overwhelming force. But ultimately, cooler heads counseled a more measured strategy of using the Watchers' accumulated historical and psychological knowledge about the root causes of conflict to erode Voss's support from within. What followed was less a conventional war and more of an oblique ideological campaign, as the Watchers reached out across the galaxy to sow doubt about Voss's supposedly benevolent goals. On world after world, they demonstrated how her conception of peace was simply a grotesque mirror of the dehumanizing hive mind control that had driven the Crucible's architects over the edge into total moral bankruptcy. Splinter groups and fringe resistance cells devoted to defending individuality began to coalesce around the Watchers' ideology. Finally, as Voss made her desperate gambit to seize control of the still unstable Crucible itself and tap into its reality-warping energies to exponentially increase the range of her psychic indoctrinators, the Watchers directly confronted her unraveling cult of personality on the blasted ground zero of the ancient conflict between humans and Accord. A multiplicity of arguments, rhetorical tactics, ideological viewpoints, and philosophical stances were deployed in an effort to erode Voss's consummate zealotry. Faced with the cold logic that her agenda of forced pacification was simply self-delusion used to justify totalitarian control over all sentient minds, Voss found herself bereft of the simple moral certainties that had sustained her transhumanist rapture. The trusted aberrant voices from the Crucible itself, which had for so long promised ascension, now rang utterly hollow in her mind's eye. With a heavy sigh, she acknowledged her utopian ambitions had utterly perverted her noble intentions of sparing the galaxy from the scourge of violence that had once consumed the humans and Accord. In that moment of wrenching self-realization, Voss's followers, many of whom had been subconsciously swayed by the Watchers' impassioned rhetoric, finally broke free of her thrall. The psychic indoctrinators were shut down, their insidious brainwashing codes purged under Voss's own supervision. Her choice of penance was to dedicate the remainder of her days to humanitarian work on the worlds left most scarred by the fallout of her well-intentioned but tragically misguided crusade. In time, the former renegade story became allegory woven into the collective consciousness of the galactic civilizations, a perpetual morality tale reminding all of the ever-present seductions of easy solutions to deeply rooted cultural and societal woes. Just as the Crucible itself had been twisted from a barren wasteland into a crucible of new life, Voss's failures helped catalyze a galactic renaissance of ethics, philosophical discourse, and impassioned ideological debate centered around reaffirming the sanctity of free will. Most importantly, the Watchers' sacrifice and perseverance Pagarai honored the primal endurance that had defined the unbroken legacies of both humanity and the Accord civilizations before they lost their way. As a memorial to those ancestral benefactors, the Order constructed a colossal figure at the heart of the regenerated Crucible, a set of humanoid statues, one from each lineage, eternally locked in the ferocious clinch of mortal combat, yet also subtly intertwined as if in a blasphemous perversion of intimacy. This disturbing yet compelling sculptural motif reminded all those who journeyed to study or simply bear witness to the reclaimed Crucible that the greatest insights into finding peace paradoxically came from mastering the most chaotic and self-destructive impulses innate to all conscious life forms. Violence was never something to be purged, but an inescapable aspect of sapient existence that had to be confronted, internalized, and kept from consuming one's higher values through constant mutable vigilance and acceptance of constant struggle. In time, the region of dead worlds and systems scarred by the primordial human Accord conflicts became known as the Eternal Crucible. a ceremonial psychic and physical plane where new generations would undertake rites of passage testing their abilities to resist the whispered lures of crusading zealotry and dogma that had once damned their forebears, and through reenacting the struggles that had once pushed both races to the brink of oblivion. The youths of each new epoch also confronted their own inner potentials for moral weakness, forsaking pride, descending into hate, and dehumanizing us vs them tribe. The most resilient and philosophically honed seekers to emerge from these harrowing ideological gauntlets would go on to become the new generation of watchers, extending the unbroken chain of those sworn to keep eternal vigil over the hidden fires of malice and conflict that smoldered within the collective psyches of all conscious species. Though the crucible itself would continue to ebb and radiate in cycles of tranquility and unrest for eons to come, the most lasting legacy of the unbreakable was to instill the wisdom that perfect peace was never an enduring stasis, but an active journey of constant introspection, debate, and struggle against one's primal flaws.